Welcome back to the AI Ripple Effect podcast, everybody. And today we're lucky enough to be joined by Weston Labar, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Waterfront Logistics. Welcome to the podcast, Weston.
Thanks for having me, Adrian. Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you. Why don't you start by giving us a little bit about yourself and Waterfront Logistics and who you typically serve from a customer perspective?
Absolutely. My background, I didn't get into supply chain on purpose. I call this industry quicksand. It's one of those that you accidentally step in and it's really hard to pull yourself out of. It's filled with opportunities, excitement, and quite frankly, there's a lot of just transformation opportunity, which is a lot of what we'll probably talk about today. I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in Pennsylvania. Go Birds! I'm a big Philadelphia Eagles fan. I always like to let people know that since we just won the Super Bowl. I went to University of Vermont for school, and then I graduated at this time when the economy was uncertain. I graduated in 2008, and about 4 months before I graduated, this little financial firm, Lehman Brothers, collapsed, and that was the beginning of the Great Recession. So I went home for a couple of years and did different things. I was a law clerk, but thinking about going to law school. I got into corporate insurance brokerage, marketing, all types of things. And then I actually was a lobbyist for the realtors organization. So I worked on a lot of private property rights.
Wow.
It was pretty cool to deliver really big political checks to some of the most important people in the country as a 23 or 24-year-old. But in 2012, my life and career took a huge turn. I moved to California. I started my own public affairs firm. It was called Pear Strategies. And I worked with a lot of business organizations like chambers of commerce, realtor groups, trade groups, and successfully built that up with a business partner. But as part of that, one of my key accounts was the Harbor Trucking Association.
Right.
After doing a little bit of consulting for about a year with them, the executive director left and they said, could you step in while we do a search? And I was the longest interim in the history of executives. I actually became the organization's first CEO, a role that I had for 7 years. I continued to run my company on the side, and it was actually at one point in time the top level executive for no less than 6 trade associations on
Wow.
port, logistics, supply chain, trade. It was a lot of fun. We built a whole operation around supporting these smaller groups that have very specific missions and charges, but not a budget to be able to hit the big bang. And then in 2018, I got really into technology. So I transitioned away from the political sphere and into early stage startups for supply chain tech. And that's really what got me to where I'm at today. From 2018 to 2021, I advised and invested in a dozen companies, 80% of which had exits, and the founders did very, very well. I didn't do terribly, but I got a single or a double. They got a home run or a grand slam. And in 2021, I went to run strategy for a growth stage company. We scaled from about 80 to 400 million in the first 18 months during the pandemic. And I've held similar positions in the clean tech sector and supply chain, all while establishing with founders how to grow and build a business around supply chains, whether that's an AI driven business, whether that's an operational tech business like a management system, whether it was clean tech. I worked with a company as their advisory chair called Evo Electric. We convert diesel trucks into electric trucks, scale. And I recently joined Waterfront Logistics here officially this year as a partner and as the chief strategy officer. And I also have the opportunity to serve as the CEO of the venture group, which is called Keynote Ventures. A little bit of everything. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Waterfront's a young company, 4 years old, but we have an experienced group of executives. Our founder and CEO was the former president of Maersk Logistics, and he ran Damco Distribution, which was their essentially landside logistics company here in the U.S. Been the CEO of Marine Terminal. We have another partner in the firm who bought and sold the same logistics company 3 times and was the president of one of the largest truckload and warehousing companies in the U.S. And I go on, but I think we all kind of came together around this idea of we've worked at big companies, we've worked at growth stage companies, we've seen a lot of the right ways to do things, but
Yeah.
also the opportunity for constant improvement. And we've assembled a team that I would put up against anybody in the industry, but we're nimble because we're still a young company, but we have some of the most fantastic, not just people, but assets. Very quickly, we're an asset-based third-party logistics company. We own and operate our own trucking fleet. We own and operate warehousing and storage yards. Our biggest facility is in the port of LA and Long Beach, where we have an 85-acre facility with 600,000 square feet of warehousing and transload, and we're just about 3 miles from the port. So we move containers in and out of the port. We then unload and load them for import or export, and then we deliver them to final destinations, everything from large solar industrial construction sites to the retailers. We deliver water and tomato sauce to some of the biggest retailers on a regular basis, and all points in between. And we operate in most of the major seaports in the US. So in Southern California, Houston, Seattle, Tacoma, New York, New Jersey, Savannah, and so on. So we're a fast growing company, and we're excited about the opportunity to do things a little bit better. I'll say one more thing and then I'll hand it over to you. But a lot of companies in our space nowadays like to categorize themselves as technology companies if there's any sort of technology.
Yeah.
We'd rather invest in technology partners, build some native technology where it makes sense, but we're a supply chain company. We're a logistics company. We just implement and use technology in a way to make things faster, more efficient, and quite frankly, easier for our operators here and our customers.
Really interesting. And I think you and I discussed last time that you are also a father of some young kids, right? I'm not sure how you've managed to fit it all in. It seems to be a manic diary.
Yeah, I've got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and they keep me on my toes. They're fantastic. They're fantastic kids, and it's why we do all these other things, right? Like I'm blessed that I get to do something I love doing for a living, and it doesn't feel like work on most days. But I also get to go home and spend time with my family and do all the things that really give you a well-balanced life. So
That's
one
right.
of the many things that you don't always get in corporate America.
Indeed, no, 100%. So thanks for giving us that overview, Weston. Now, the market itself, I've been speaking to various leaders and I'm hearing various trends that are emerging, labor market constraints, market share competition, tariffs. I would love to hear your views firsthand on what you're experiencing, what your views are of the current trends in the market.
Yeah, well, if you look at what's just going on from a macro perspective, this is sort of an economic inflection point. We, for the last 30 plus years, have been part of a global economy. We looked at free trade and the 90s as the path forward. As a country, we started outsourcing our manufacturing to other nations, China being prominently the largest, where you could get lower cost manufacturing of goods. And in many instances, especially at the time, the sale was, these are jobs Americans don't want anyway, right? So we can get you your finished products made elsewhere and bring them here and get them to you cheaper. And it was all around consumer trends.
Sure.
Fast forward, we're now in an instance where there's a desire to bring some of that manufacturing back to the US, and tariffs have been used as a major negotiating tool to try to move the needle. You can't undo 30 years of progress on a strategy overnight. And so, from a business continuity standpoint, whether you agree or disagree with the policies, the way it's been handled has been a little bit of a nightmare for independent businesses to try to navigate. And so when you're on the front lines of literally the importing and exporting of the nation, we build our business around something we like to call happy flow, right? You build your assets around the customers you serve. So if you're used to moving 1,000 shipments a day and you have the amount of trucks to do that, you don't want to be in a situation where one day you're moving 100 shipments and then the recoil of that is you have to move 2,000 shipments, a week or two later.
Right.
And with these ebbs and flows in the economy, we need to figure out what we want to manufacture here and how we want to manufacture it, because 30 years ago, automation was not what it is today. So is it going to be the job creator? Is it going to be the same end all be all? I got to think that we're not as keen on smelting steel and mining coal and doing some of these things that maybe 50 years ago were so prevalent in the United States. But we also have to look at the logistics industry as modern manufacturing and what is the impact to logistics. I always use Apple as an example. I have an iPhone. the iPhone, it's got thousands of components that go in there, of
Sure.
which Apple makes none. Apple
Yeah.
designs the iPhone. They do that here in the United States. They then source the components from all over the world. They bring it to an assemblance hub that can be here in the US. They have a final product that they've marketed and sold and made it so all the cool kids want to have an iPhone. And that's modern manufacturing. You design a product, you market and sell a product, you source all the componentry or a good majority of it, even if you're considered a manufacturer, you put it together and you distribute it. When we don't have all that componentry coming through the ports and we don't have the final product then assembled to go out to the customer, it's the transportation sector that's bearing the brunt of that. And when we see these ebbs and flows, the biggest concern is if I have 100 trucks servicing customers in a market every day,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden my business drops, I only need 50. Well, guess what? I still have to pay for those extra 50 trucks, whether they're parked or moving. So at a certain point in time, you don't want to have the carrying cost of that asset. So you have to take a look at, is my fleet right sized? Well, when you know that it's part of not an economic recession in the sense that there's some global event going on, it's more of part of this tariff negotiation. The biggest issue you have is you don't know when your customer is going to all of a sudden ramp up their need for your activity again. And you can't be in a situation where tomorrow you need to add those 50 trucks if you took them out of your fleet. And the
Right.
other part is on the frontline workers, because if the trucks are parked, even though we have employee drivers, they get hired by the hour based on the number of hours worked. So if I don't have those hours for them to work, I don't call them in, because you can't pay somebody when you don't have work for them to do. But
Right.
then we
Right.
risk them going elsewhere. The same for our warehouse workers, so on and so forth. So there's this constant game of chess you're playing with your assets, with your employees, trying to do the best thing for the frontline employee and the business at the same time, making sure that you're not spending too much money at a time where your revenues drop because of inactivity in the market as a whole,
Yeah.
but then also not be caught with your pants down when your customer needs you next week to get them out of a pinch because now they're going to take 3 months worth of freight and dump it on the docks of the US ports. So it's a fun game that we're playing.
Oh, sure. I mean that variation seems to possibly exacerbate the whole typical levers of managing and optimizing costs or improving efficiency levels. You just don't have the visibility on when that's happening. So the external environment seems to be horrendously challenging, and that puts an added emphasis on trying to keep that efficiency and those optimization efforts right on their
Yeah.
toes, ready to go, right?
It's all very reactionary, and it's called a supply chain because of how interwoven it is. And that's the other thing, is each node of the supply chain depends on the previous node to essentially have a clean handoff, and for the subsequent node to be able to pick up that baton. It's like a giant relay race, but as opposed to a baton, it's a container, it's a trailer, it's a pallet, right? So when you don't have visibility, as an industry, we've gotten better, but you need to know when the ship's going to be loaded. You need to know when the ship's going to be unloaded. You need to know when there's an appointment available at the port. You need to know when there's a truck available for that appointment. You need to know when there's a driver available for that truck. And I could continue to go on and on and on, but it's all so codependent on one another that we literally have a supply chain reaction. Both
Right.
when things get slow, it creates congestion because you get a lot of these bottlenecks. And then when things get super busy super quickly, you're trying to put 10 pounds of freight in a 5-pound freight bag, to paraphrase an old adage. So it's, from our industry, is dependent on consistency across the board. And that's why these supply chain disruptions have such lasting effects and impacts, is because the longer they last, then the harder it is to dig out of it.
In this environment of uncertainty and variation, what's your take on AI as a supporter or a resolution, or do you think that it is not even capable of handling this variation in logistics?
Yeah, no, conceptually, I think AI has so many benefits to it. I think it's really about understanding AI, right? So last fall, I took 3 months. Having small kids, I wanted to spend a little bit more time at home before I dove back into the next big enterprise. And in my free time, I took an EMBA course on AI strategies for business at MIT. And one of the biggest things that you learn is that you have to be able to architect your AI in a long-term fashion to understand what are you trying to get out of it and how do you get there. So the first thing I'd say is most of us use AI every day, whether we realize it's AI or not. Something as simple as Google is leveraging artificial intelligence to query the
Absolutely.
entire internet in milliseconds we could spend our whole life looking through the internet and we wouldn't get through 10% of it if we tried to look at all that information ourselves. In our industry, we see things like natural language processing for contracts, to ocular recognition, to grab data off of equipment and off of documents, to what people really want to get to, which is large language model, machine learning, and even more sophisticated use of AI. And I think the problem is most people don't understand the value of the very narrow AI that you need to use over top of very specific functions that then helps create the data. And again, we talked about this previously, but everybody wants to do data cleansing and they want to get rid of their bad data. Bad data to me is as valuable as good data because you have to teach AI models what's wrong and what's right. So everybody who's ever logged into a website and it asks you to pick all the pictures of a bicycle, the AI has taught that those images of this is a bicycle, this is not a bicycle. And so you need to do some of the same things in our industry of this is a chassis, this is not a chassis, this is a license plate, this is not a license plate, things of that nature if you're using camera, ocular recognition, et cetera. And so it's about first generating the data you need and layering it almost as a pyramid to where you finally get to the tip of the pyramid. You can put the large language modeling on top of it. Now what's really cool is you get into stuff that we're working on, like scenario planning, right? So as opposed to having a single person beating their head against this driver's stuck here, or he's going to be late to this warehouse appointment, what do I do next? You can start to look at your entire ecosystem and do some predictive analytics and some predictive learning and say, okay, if this, then that, and try not to fix one problem and create a dozen more at the same time. I believe AI is the future of our industry because of how interconnected, disparate operating partners are. I think a lot of it's about shared data, shared visibility, and taking what are currently blind handoffs and giving them sight. And I think that's where we need to get to.
I think it's a great point. And I know you guys are quite advanced in the fact that you have your own data lake and you have that large asset of data that you can then, I assume, in a strategic sense, leverage that to inform and make more efficient your processes and your customer service, et cetera.
Yeah, it's about having a data lake where you have this repository of both current and historic information so you can continue to leverage the data to learn. I also love the data lake approach because a lot of people have architected these very archaic tech stacks where they've got these different solutions that are integrated with one another. And quite frankly, they should have never been integrated directly. And you can now integrate into something like a data lake where you have all of the same information in one spot, and it services much like a switchboard used to for the phone company. You know, you call one operator and they're sticking the cords here and there. Well, it's a very similar thing. You have API integrations with each of your systems, and if something's not working, you just pull it out of the system and you plug in the new module, as opposed to saying, okay, well, my warehouse systems connected to my transportation systems, connected to my yard system, and so on and so forth. Well, it's a much tougher task to do simple replacement of really what's front-facing technology, as opposed to having to re-architect your whole system and rip out the guts. It's expensive, it's disruptive. And so being a young company, we have a distinct advantage that we don't have all this legacy stuff we need to unwind. We can purpose build moving forward, which it's kind of our version of a design build project.
Right. And obviously, as a young company, you're on a steep growth curve. What have been the key milestones that you like to pick out on that recent growth curve, Weston?
Yeah, well, look, the company started in 2021, and our CEO had this great vision and the relationships to essentially be able to do wholesale buying of things like container storage and warehouse storage, and even getting access to trucks and then selling them retail dedicated to large enterprise customers and making it a lot simpler for them. And the company has evolved since then, because during the pandemic, there was an absolute need for that. And for somebody or a team of people that really understand the industry from cradle to grave. The biggest milestone is probably the facility I'm sitting in, our 85-acre flagship facility at the Port of Los Angeles.
Right.
We took that over 3 years ago. We were the largest customer. An opportunity popped up. We took the facility over, and all of a sudden, we're the largest player in the market from a capability standpoint. There's no facility this close to the port, this size, that operates as a distribution hub. So people sometimes I don't think believe us when we tell them we have 85 acres just a stone's throw from the port, and we can do all of their transloading and warehousing and storage and all the equipment we have. Someone said to me, "What's your marketing strategy?" I was like, "I just want to get them on a field trip here, because if somebody sees this facility,
Sure.
it can do way more than I can ever do on a phone call or a virtual meeting." And it's proved itself out. So I think that was a major milestone. And then in this year, we rebranded as Waterfront, right? We had several different operating entities. They're now all under the
Right.
Waterfront banner, where we're allowed to take those services and create a blended portfolio of solutions for the customer to say, okay, we can handle everything from point A to point B, or different components of it. You let us know. And we have customers that are everything from large retailers to global logistics companies to local mom and pop truckers who just need a place to park a container or a truck and maybe have a warehousing partner like us. Those are probably the biggest milestones that we had, was start the company, get your flagship facility, and then rebrand into one cohesive entity that is Waterfront Logistics.
It sounds like a breathtaking journey. And obviously, that must have been a challenging change environment, bringing these companies together and rebranding. What's been the biggest challenge for you guys over, say, the last 12 months?
Tariffs. I think in general, it comes down to, it's really hard to do business continuity planning when you don't know what tomorrow will bring. And even if you compare this to the tariffs that got put in place at midnight on December 31st, 2018, right? In the first
Yeah.
Trump administration, we knew they were coming. So anybody who was doing front loading of freight to not get subject to 301 and 321 and all these different number tariffs at the beginning of 2019, you knew there was going to be a huge surge. You could prepare for it. You also knew there was going to be a huge drop off in freight. And 2019 was a freight recession because 2018 was such a banner year. They just brought all their cargo in faster. Even the pandemic, the beginning was all over the map. As you know, as we got going, it just took time to dig out, because literally everything was shut down, from manufacturing facilities in China to warehouses, here in the U.S. and retail stores, right? So we saw this fundamental shift to e-commerce. But again, you could see that coming. The only thing that you didn't know is when are we going to be able to go back to work? When are different countries going to open things up? This is different because it's one day you have a tariff, the next day there's a pause on it. One day it's this commodity in this country, the next day there's a deal on that one, but there's a new. It's very disruptive. And so again, from a continuity perspective, you don't want to have an operating cost that you're carrying where you don't have the business to support it, but you don't want to have a situation in a week or a month or a quarter where you have a huge influx of cargo and you have a disappointed customer. And it's a constant balancing act to make sure that you're not carrying the cost so long that you go out of business. And this is across the board. Everybody's doing this, but also you want to be ready to be the first in line when your customer says, okay, I have 10,000 containers coming over this month. Can you handle them? I want to be able to say, yep, we're here. And we feel like we're in that position, but we have to be very smart about this.
That's really insightful. I mean, so what are your, I know it's hard to predict, but I'm assuming you have your strategy laid out for the next 12 months. What are your plans for the next 12 months at Waterfront?
Grow and grow. We've diversified. I think that's the best thing is, we've looked at our operating models in each market, and we're making sure that they're the best from both a quality of service, but then also cost perspective in each market. We've looked at our entire organization to understand, do we have the right people in the right roles? Are they in the right facilities? It's that constant battle of what can be done by technology, what needs to be done by people. Do you invest in technology to make one person more productive? And then, we've also diversified our customers and our product lines and our business. 2 years ago, we were not doing any break bulk. Now some of our biggest accounts are steel and aluminum.
Right.
And despite the tariffs, those are still moving because there is not an alternative to make it here. So it's just driven the cost up. It will eventually lead to more domestic production of these products. But for us, it's been one of the reasons we're still in a really good spot. We have a unique facility and equipment and expertise to where we can handle it. And at any given time, half of our facility may be filled with different types of raw metal materials.
Wow.
that, like I said, 2 years ago, we didn't even think was part of our strategy. And we've become less reliant on retail or containerized cargo, but we're still doing that. We're still growing with those customers. We've become less reliant on the ebbs and flows of their businesses.
Wow. I mean, that underlines the agility, the need for agility in your business, which you seem to have set up, which is great. So listen, for those listening and watching out there, Weston, where can they find out more about Waterfront Logistics?
Yeah, you can go to waterfrontlogistics.com, or you can follow us on LinkedIn. Primarily, that's where we do a lot of our social media is LinkedIn. Just linkedin.com/waterfront logistics. You can also follow me, Weston Labar. It's the same thing. Easy to Google. I'm the only person in the world with the name Weston Labar, so I'm easy to find. And that's a great avenue to be able to follow Waterfront as well. But it's a great way to stay up to speed on what's going on in the industry. I love doing these types of podcasts with experts like yourself and different, how do I put this, different flavors of what's going on in the industry, right? The nuance to it.
Yeah.
And we also do a lot in mainstream media, whether it's national public radio, whether it's television, where we can give visual sites of our tours of our site, or whether it's print media like the Journal of Commerce, the Wall Street Journal. We try to do our best to help educate the public on what's a very complex industry. And we have our own media page that we host on our website as well. So if anybody ever is wondering what's going on, following Waterfront Logistics on LinkedIn or heading over to our media page is a great way to get a snapshot of what's going on and where to look for more information.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Weston. I'll make sure we include those links in the description of this podcast when we get it out there. Thank you, everybody, for joining today, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Goodbye.